America is essentially a dream.
Good evening, welcome to Network X, and I'm your host, Bill Brignoli. There are a number of labor struggles that are racking the city of Seattle this holiday season, most notably of which, up until now, has seemed to be the Seattle newspaper strike. But another one, a little perhaps less notable, has been the struggle of the teacher assistants at the University of Washington to gain recognition. And they've won a substantial victory. We're going to talk about that victory and their organizing efforts tonight here. So join me in welcoming two teacher aides who have come out tonight to be on the program. To my left, we have Maureen Boyd.
Hi.
Thanks for joining us, Maureen. Maureen is a teacher assistant in the English department.
Mm-hmm.
That's correct?
That's right, yeah.
And to Maureen's left, we have Ken Lang, who is a graduate student in the history department.
That's
at the
right.
University of Washington.
Nice to be here.
Yeah, glad you could make it out on such short notice. But first of all, the thing that struck me is here you are at the University of Washington, yet you're connecting for union representation with the United Auto Workers. Mm-hmm. Show me the connection.
Well, the United Auto Workers is the union in the U.S. that represents more TAs than any other union on campuses that have TAs. They represent TAs in the University of California system, University of Massachusetts, and NYU, and now the University of Washington. And they've just been, over the last 10 or 15 years, the union in the U.S. that's been the most supportive of TAs that were interested in organizing and had already begun organizing, like ourselves.
So they've actually gone out and, you may say, courted service sector employees. Because in some respect, you're in the service sector.
Right. Well, the UAW as a whole has a large technical office and professional division that's one of the fastest growing parts of the union. And so they represent clerical workers in some states, a number of other, so-called white-collar employees, and TAs are just one of those groups.
Well, what prompted you to try and gain union representation at the UW to begin with?
Well, do you want to take that? You go ahead and take that one, Ken.
In general, I think it's no different than any other union campaign. I think a large number of TAs, graders, and tutors on campus just began to realize that collective bargaining offered a much more significant voice in terms of determining the conditions under which you work, and so we started organizing.
And well, was there any one particular effort, or any one particular issue that came up that people just finally said, well, we need a union here?
Well, there are a lot of different issues, and different things speak to different TAs. One thing that happened a couple of years ago is the health insurance was cut drastically, but that was one of many different things that sort of really brought into high relief the fact that we had absolutely no say in the conditions of our work. We could consult. There was what they call a shared governance structure available to us, where we would sit on committees and do research about TA working conditions or TA salaries and investigate peer institution TA salaries. But ultimately all we could do was do research and make recommendations. We had absolutely no power. We had no authority. And that was something that, all of the TAs really across the university could really relate to.
Well, who was supposed to act on that research that you did?
Well, we would make, I mean, basically they were committees that were constructed by the administration. President McCormick and other administrators would make appointments to those committees. The committees would do their research, and then they make advice to the administration, or they make recommendations to President McCormick. So then it was sort of at the will of the administration or President McCormick to decide whether or not to take those recommendations, what to do with those recommendations, what kinds of actions to take. So we had no real power. You know, and that was very obvious and had been very clear for, you know, many years, you know, and just finally people decided to do something about that, take action.
Well, how would the university go about that? Like, let's say you say they cut your health insurance by 40%. Did they even send around a memo? Did they give you any advance notice, or was it suddenly one day you just went for your health premium and suddenly you realized, oh, this isn't covered any longer? We
were actually notified after it had been put into effect. We weren't even given prior notice. I think it was a memo. It was a written form of notification, and it was about 2 weeks approximately after it had taken effect, and that really sort of exemplifies the kind of powerlessness that we had under the shared governance structure. Beginning, that's one of many issues, you know, that were at work.
Well, so how did the organizing effort coalesce? I mean, did 5 people meet for drinks one night and decide, hey, this stinks, we got to do something about it? Give our viewers a little bit of the story of how you got started.
I think that there was a sort of fluctuating group of people who were, you know, always talking about forming a union, who had, you know, come to realize that, say, what happened to the health insurance was just one example of a bigger situation where, you know, we really were completely at the whim of the administration. And so, you know, people started talking about forming a union, and, you know, about a year ago we started organizing and began, you know, a relationship with the United Auto Workers. So last winter quarter we did a card drive, you know, and signed people up on membership cards, on cards that, you know, say, I want to be represented by GSAC UAW in collective bargaining with the UW. And last winter quarter, 80% of the TAs, graders, and tutors on campus signed those cards,
80%.
Which is a, you know, a huge number. And we submitted those cards to the State Labor Board, and you know, there's a provision in the state law that allows the university to engage in collective bargaining with us as a union if they consent, and they chose not to at that point. So we just sort of continued organizing, and spring quarter the number went up to 84%, and the vast majority of those people spring quarter also put their names on an open letter, sort of went public with the fact that they were union members. It's almost 1,200 people, and we gave that letter to the administration at the end of spring quarter, and again they said, no, we don't want to bargain with you. And so that sort of led up to this fall quarter where, you know, it was clear to us and everybody who was on the organizing committee and a lot of the departments on campus that the only way we would, you know, get them to come to the table and respect that huge mandate was to, you know, prepare to go on strike. So more, you know, almost 1,000 people voted for the strike.
So you took a strike vote.
Yeah. And it's the credibility of that strike vote that actually moved the administration as far as they moved. I mean,
well, I'd have to say I'm a union member in the Building Trades and Construction Council here in Seattle, and I've been involved in the organizing efforts of many of the building trades and construction unions. And a percentage of that high on a card check effort is astounding.
Yeah.
It's truly astounding. And the fact that you've not only held that percentage, but you've actually added to it, it says you're certainly doing something right in your efforts. Whether or not your natural's at it, or you've got the UAW giving you some good coaching, you're doing a good job. How about give our viewers kind of a profile of the TAs? How many, you mentioned how many there were, but give me a breakdown of like, well, who are they? Are they graduate students? Are they regular students? Are they, who are they?
Well, the vast majority are graduate students. There are some undergraduate TAs as well. We also represent readers and tutors and graders. Those are oftentimes undergraduates as well.
Now, is this something students have to participate in as part of their degree program, or is this something you're doing just to make a few extra dollars to pay for your education? You
cannot be a TA. You cannot work in this capacity unless you are enrolled as a student. So that was part of the reason, or part of sort of the excuse that the administration used for a long time to not recognize us as workers. The fact that we were also enrolled as students. The typical graduate student TA has to conduct, her or his own research, their own work, take their own classes, or, write their dissertation, plus perform teaching duties, instructional duties, which for most TAs means leading a discussion section, leading a lab. That involves contact with the undergraduates. Graduate students make up the vast majority of the contact hours with freshmen and sophomores at the university.
Really?
Yeah, they do. It's about 60% of the contact hours with freshmen and sophomores. So graduate student TAs are obviously very, very crucial to the educational experience of undergraduates. They do a significant portion of the work, period. And they're supposed to work about 20 hours a week. Many of them work in excess of that. So, you want to add anything to that, Ken?
Well, I mean, you were saying that they're obviously crucial to the undergraduate educational experience on campus, and I think, it's not just the amount of or the portion of the work that TAs do, but it's really it's the majority of the actual face-to-face contact that students get in those first 2 years at the university is with TAs. And, I think most people who graduate from the university would probably say, TAs were absolutely critical to their education there.
That raises actually a number of questions in my mind. From what it sounds like, and I think if your percentage is correct, you're saying basically more than half of the work that goes on at the UW is being performed by TAs.
Yeah, I think especially if you factor in grading, it's really safe to say that TAs do probably half the undergraduate educational work. Yeah.
Now, in lieu of that, where does the compensation package for those efforts compare to, say, other staff who are responsible for the same work?
Well, the compensation oftentimes is simply not equivalent. For example, as I said already, we're supposed to work approximately 20 hours a week and be paid for that. Many TAs at many points in the academic year work in excess of that.
How much in excess?
It varies. It depends from department to department. It could be anywhere between 25 and 35 hours a week as opposed to 20 hours a week, for example.
So you're talking about anywhere from 25 to 50% more than you're actually getting paid for.
Approximately. And it depends on the TA, depends on the department, it depends on the nature of the TA's responsibilities. For example, in English, I teach my own class, I design my own curriculum, I select the textbooks,
Really?
I do all of the grading, I do, all of it. I am the sole contact they have with any kind of English instructor, period. When a TA is leading a discussion section, oftentimes that's almost like teaching your own class as well. They have the primary contact with the student, they answer the student's questions, as opposed to the professor who oftentimes stands up and lectures. So, again, obviously there are some differences, there's some variety there.
Well, how do the wages then compare, say, to a TA and a regular faculty person?
Oh, significant difference. Huge. There's no comparison.
Really? Do you get paid about a third of what they get paid, or quarter, or what?
I don't even think that much. Do you even think that much?
Yeah,
I'm not math.
Made that kind of comparison.
Well, what is the range that a TA earns?
It's
about $11
to $1,300 a month. It depends. There's a range.
So about $14,000 a year.
Well, we don't work
usually
the whole
only 9
year.
months, so it's lower than that.
Yeah, you fend for yourself over the summer. In a nutshell. It's about, 9,000 to 11,000?
I think it's like 10 to 12.
10 to 12?
And there's, there's health insurance benefits and a tuition waiver as well.
Amazing. Well, to move into another subject, let's go back to your effort. How did your organizing effort begin?
We just decided that, we thought through, we want to have a union. How are we going to get the university to respect that choice? And, basically it was a matter of mobilizing enough people, to put pressure on the administration to do the right thing. And, like we said before, first step was a card drive and getting everybody to talk about collective bargaining and what we could do through collective bargaining, and it's such a reasonable idea that most people, 80% of the people, clearly saw that that was a preferable way of addressing employment issues than through what the university calls shared governance.
So it was a pretty easy sell.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and it's also going on all across the country. I mean, there are 28 recognized TA unions on public university campuses around the country, and you probably heard that the NLRB just ruled recently that TAs at private universities should have collective bargaining rights as well. So it's a growing movement on college campuses across the country. It's not just here, and that momentum kind of helped too, I think.
What do you think prompted it? In other words, why now? Do you think there are any pressures that TAs are under now that they weren't under before?
I mean, that's hard to say. I mean, it's obviously a very complex issue. There's a lot. I mean, there's just a lot going on in Washington State right now as well in terms of the larger labor movement, right? Obviously, the newspaper guild strike that we're all very keenly aware of. There was a WTO last year. There were the Kaiser Steel workers. The big Boeing, the SPIA strike. That was an incredibly successful strike, white-collar strike.
So you think TAs were watching all these efforts?
I think we were aware, obviously. Yeah, we were very much attuned to what's going on. I mean, in other words, unionization is not just about the blue-collar industries anymore, right? I mean, it's clearly becoming sort of a white-collar trend as well. And it's obviously needed in the white-collar sector, and that's what the SPIA strike really demonstrated, obviously. More recently, right now.
Yeah. Well,
yeah,
I mean,
yeah.
right. The SPIA thing was, a great example of, I guess, the so-called white-collar workers kind of finally, in that case, stepping up and saying, we're going to actually go out on strike. I think a lot of them didn't believe they could do it, and they actually did. I think our campaign is another example of that, and now there's apparently an organizing campaign going on at the university bookstore. I don't know very much about that, but hopefully the management at the university bookstore will act in the same way that the university administration did with us, and actually respect their right to organize and start to bargain collectively.
Well, actually, speaking about the actions of the UW, I've been involved in a lot of organizing efforts in the blue-collar sector, and it's incredible some of the things that the employment or the administration responds with once you start these efforts. What was the UW's response to your organizing efforts?
Throw money at us. That's one of the responses.
That's usually the first thing.
Right.
What I usually tell people about union organizing is the moment a union arrives on the scene to organize, your conditions are going to improve immediately. Even if you don't get the union in, you're immediately going to get some kind of compensation in the employer's attempt to buy you off. But was it similar then at UW?
Yeah, well, last spring, at the very end of spring quarter, they gave back some of our health insurance benefits that were taken away 2 years ago. So you would be right. And that was sort of their initial response, was throw things at us, or co-optation, trying to make it look like they were really serious about making the shared governance, student government system on campus work better. Even though 80% of us had essentially rejected that system. So that was sort of their initial response. And they didn't have any kind of real elaborate excuses for not recognizing the union. I mean, they were the same excuses other administrators have used around the country, trying to say we weren't really employees.
It wasn't collegial.
It was going to disrupt collegiality. Right.
It wasn't a very friendly thing to want. Right?
So it didn't get much dirtier than that. It was basically just sort of, you might call it intellectual coercion.
Yeah.
Divide and conquer.
Yeah.
I mean, there's definitely administration made a very clear position against unionization for quite a long time. And then after our strike vote, that position changed. I mean, the administration literally moved about 30 years in 3 weeks.
Really?
Yeah, literally.
How so?
Well, they had said we were always had said we weren't employees, that we were students, not employees. You know, after strike vote, President McCormick stood up at the Faculty Senate and said, "I made a mistake."
Wow.
They're students and they're employees. They're employees and they're students.
So hence the first part of your victory.
Yes, absolutely.
And he was merely acknowledging what, you know, labor boards around the country had been saying as well, that we are students and employees, and what the NLRB had said. But it took, you know, us, you know, committing to go on strike to get him to acknowledge that. And that was when, you know, the university for the first time said, "Oh, we're willing to support and lobby for legislation that would create a statutory framework under which we could negotiate with you as a union." That they had opposed that sort of legislation for 30 years. In fact, they were the main reason we don't have any explicit collective bargaining rights in the law as it stands today. The law allows them to bargain with us, but it doesn't compel them in any way to bargain with us.
That may have answered the question, but for the benefit of some of our viewers that this might be very new to, so you're going to the legislature now with the University of Washington administration. Okay. Now, why do you have to do that, and what do you hope to get from them by doing that?
We don't have to do that.
Right.
We agreed to do that.
Okay.
What the administration did was they moved significantly. They said, "We recognize your union. We will immediately begin meeting and conferring with you over labor conditions, working conditions, benefits, wages, hours, and that they would come to agreement with us at the table, you know, as peers." And we agreed to go to the legislature with them and write legislation with them to confirm this process. Do you want to add anything to that?
Yeah, I mean, that's the essential point or answer to your question is we don't have to do this.
So do they have the authority right now to bargain with you?
Our position has always been that the law does not need to change.
So the law as it exists, in your opinion, gives them the right to collectively bargain with you.
Yes.
So is it a fiscal issue, or what?
It's unclear. They certainly never made that argument publicly. That might be one of their concerns. I think that's, you know, possible.
Well, I guess what I'm getting at is, could this be nothing more than just a stalling effort?
No,
so that
because
then they could go to the legislature and the legislature basically cries, you know, Initiative 601, and basically, you know, everybody winds up, you know, wringing their hands. Oh, gee, well, we love you, and you know, we recognize you, but gee, you know, we're all broke. We can't do this because of the will of the people, and Tim Eyman, who might come back with a nastier one. I mean, you see what I'm getting at here? Right.
No, there are big, you know, certainly big fiscal considerations surrounding this whole issue. I mean, basically, the reason we're going to Olympia is at the point where the strike was about to happen. Our strike was for voluntary recognition of the union. That was the only thing that would prevent a strike from happening on December 4th. Their position was, we don't think it's in our best interest. I mean, usually they would say we can't, but what they really meant was it's not in our best interest to recognize you without a change in the law that creates some framework under which we can do it.
Under which they can bargain with you.
Right.
Okay. And they're claiming that doesn't exist now.
Right.
And what is your legal counsel say?
Well, our position was anything that would be in that statutory framework could be in a voluntary recognition agreement in terms of what's the scope of bargaining, who's in the bargaining unit, etc. So the agreement we reached, you know, hours before the strike was set to start was essentially one, you know, that, you know, where we got union recognition in the interim and, you know, agreed for their sake, you know, if they, you know, want to have the security of that statutory framework over the long run, we would work on that as well. But you know, we still don't think it's necessary, and you know, we haven't given up our main piece of leverage, which was the strike threat, because if the legislation doesn't pass, this agreement we signed is over. And therefore we, you know, are back in strike mode. And the university knows that. So they have a very powerful incentive to actually work hard on passing this legislation with us.
We're getting near the end of our program. And actually, you wrapped it up on a good point. But one thing I did want to ask you, what again is the name of your organization?
The Graduate Student Employee Action Coalition, UAW. So it's GSEC UAW.
Okay, and do you have a phone number or a website that some of our viewers might want to contact you at to find out more?
Well, our phone number is 206 area code 633-6080.
Okay.
And people can call us there with questions, opinions.
All right, good. I wanted to make sure we had the time to get that off.
Yeah,
so
great,
now we
thank
can
you.
go back on it. All right, so where do we stand here in brief, and what could some of our viewers do if they want to help your efforts?
Well,
maybe that's the most important question right now.
If you're a TA at the University of Washington, or you're a reader or a grader or a tutor, you know, get involved. You know, our campaign has been enormously successful because everyone has been involved.
Right, and if not, we'll just tell them to contact the legislature and say, make sure this gets passed.
Yeah, absolutely.
Well, we hope to hear from you as things progress. Please contact us and we'll get you back on here to bring our viewers up to date. But thanks for joining us tonight.
Thank you.
And thank you for joining us this evening on Network X. And let me ask you to tune in next Friday at the same time for more provocative programming on this and other issues that affect your daily lives. And for Network X, I'm your host, Bill Brignoli, tonight sending you out with the usual marching orders. Stay informed and get involved. And have a good holiday season.
America is essentially a dream.